Thank you, Dr. Gindi. It's my pleasure to be here and to have this presentation. I'm just out of fire into the frying pan. So my presentation is entitled International Migration and the Family / Household in Arab Countries, an attempt to explain the phenomenon of peasant migration. I'm trying to look at this relationship between migration and the family, and we know that my point of departure here is the theory of articulation of modes of production. Basically, it's time for some theoretical heavy stuff here. And the main advantage of that theoretical approach is that it allows us to integrate the household into the more general frame of the world capitalist system at the same time. My argument basically is that the peasants as a social stratum must be understood not only as subjects to the world capitalist system, but also as social actors who make choices at a given point in time. I don't only take the theory of articulation of mode of production as my point. I try to bridge the gap between this theory and other contributions, including Emmanuel Wallerstein world system approach, including as well the French structural Marxist perspective of Emmanuel Terray and Claude Miessot, as well as the famous debate between James C. Scott and Samuel Popkin on the rationality of the peasants themselves. However, the subject itself is really problematic. On the one hand, the migrating unit is in the world system today is always an individual, and we are trying to look at a different level that my colleague Dr. Makhlouf concluded with, an intermediate level, the household or the family. It's a different level, so measuring the impact appears to be, with having two different levels, it appears to be a bit problematic in this case and needs some qualification, and it's the household inclusion in the process that allows us to measure these dynamics and changing roles of both in the same time. Yet there is still some problems. One of them is that migration, we need to identify as well what kind of family are we talking about. There are several forms of family. There is a household, there is a what we call my eyes are getting weak now. Family as a kinship unit. We have a linear or a clan, and then we have large networks of kindred at the same time. So we need to qualify this. And further, households or families can be classified as nuclear, stem, joint, and whatever extended. So what are we talking about here is something that needs some qualification. And I focus rather on the household. I adopt the concept of the household rather than the kinship-based conceptualization of families. And then we come to another problem. What type of migration are we talking about? The world today is full. We have refugees, 3 million Syrian refugees as a result of the crisis. We have, are we talking about the lower classes, the middle class, the upper class migration? Are we talking about urban households or rural households? There is a considerable number of problems that need to be qualified here before we start talking. And I chose to try to build a kind of a middle-range theory here, focusing on the peasantry and its migration patterns and so on. Contemporary migration is essentially labor migration. Historically, labor had to contend with one major challenge: providing a reliable supply of labor that will allow the process of accumulation to take place. And it has used corvée, slavery, camp labor, and other forms, and lastly, wage labor as its main way of satisfying this demand for labor. Within the world economy today, this world economy, the basic unit of it is a nation state, or the nation states. And given the concept of nation states, we have boundaries, yet we have a world system at the same time. This appears paradoxical. Why do we have boundaries if we have nation state, if we have a world system at the same time? That appears that the borders play a functional role for the process. First of all, it allows, for example, it's functional. It creates spatial inequality between one area and the other. So it makes the migrant appear as he is holding a calculator, juggling numbers to calculate the advantages and the disadvantages of migration, and makes the decision about, based on these juggling of numbers. So the rationality appears here, and this is the idea upon which the push-pull model is based, basically, that the man is rational and economic maximirus homos economicus here. The second thing, it acts as a filter to maintain one of the distinctive characteristics of migration, that is selectivity, by age, by any other thing. Then it allows capital to avoid the process of producing and reproducing the labor force itself, by saving on social services, by according certain segments of the migrant labor a criminal status, illegal immigrants. So they become increasingly exploitable under these conditions of illegality that they suffer from. Okay. And of course they reduce, when there is a sluggishness in the world economic cycle, they can be sent back to their home country, so the home country carries the cost of maintaining this labor force during this sluggish economic performance in the world economy. Okay. Here that we have this, we know that the dominant model up until recently was the push-pull model, which I reframed. It was Immanuel Wallerstein who first made the argument, or tried to relate the idea of international division of labor, and that the subjection of labor assumed several forms and so on. Yet it was Saskia Sassen-Cobb who argued first in 1990 that the distinctive character of labor in the world system today is that it has been transformed into a commodity, or a mobile commodity, so to speak, that can be transferred upon request from one area to the other. In this context, we have to understand inter-Arab labor migration as a product of unequal development. My colleague and friend and mentor, Sa'ad Ibrahim, has previously argued that the Arab countries can be divided into several groups: rich oil countries, middle of the road, poor, and well-to-do, among other categorizations. Such classification is misleading, as it reduces unequal development into unequal exchange rather than unequal development, where cheap labor force migrate, and this migration is explained by overpopulation or the existence of migration surplus. Miyaso understands the peasantry in a different context. Why do they migrate? But Miyaso looks at the peasant household as a migrating unit that is essentially geared toward subsistence production and subsistence consumption. In this state of affair, the peasant household is really cash avert. It attempts to reduce dependence on cash as much as possible. Yet with increasing capitalist penetration, it finds itself in a precarious position, or caught between the cliff and the quern at the same time. So it has to release part of its labor into the international market or the national market to work for wage in order to be able to pay for cash, buy agricultural inputs, send children to school, or whatever it is. All these aspects push the household into releasing part of its labor force into the wage labor market. But by doing that, the process of production of subsistence economy becomes increasingly threatened as a result of the labor shortage at the household level, for which it has to compensate sometimes by either hiring outside wage labor from the neighboring village and so on, or by increasing or lengthening the work day, the time of work at the household level. In its ideal type, these households remain outside the domain of the world system, i.e. it is not produced, it is produced in underdeveloped sectors of the economy that are not subject to the direct cash, and that's what explains the cheapness of this labor force. Why can we buy this labor power at a lower rate than buying someone who has been produced in one of the advanced countries? It's because they are being produced under non-capitalist relations of production that's articulated with the capitalist mode of production. This labor force that's produced in this way is exploitable in two ways: directly in the labor market itself as wage labor, and indirectly because capital does not carry the cost of producing and reproducing this labor force. In this situation, the household can be characterized as being one that is going through a stage of permanent instability or stability of instability. It's always figuring that it is unstable at the same time. It is trying to maintain this. Okay. I want to go back now to the idea of stability, the ability of peasant household to produce and reproduce itself within the context of integration in the market. This process leads the peasant household to lose control over labor itself, and thus finds itself in losing its peasantly character and running the risk of full proletarization or partial proletarization at the same time. In this context, Miyaso argue that the inevitable result of this process is the demise of the household economy and subsistence economy of the peasants. I don't see this as Miyaso argued in his work. Neither the long historical experience, colonial experience of Egypt, for example, have led to the decline of the peasant household, nor the large capitalist agriculture in Egypt or in any other of the other Arab countries play a major role in the process of agricultural production. Agricultural production in the Arab world is still built on the household economy and the small farm agriculture. I think it is possible to move forward or step forward by arguing that international labor migration is capable of revitalizing the household and re-injecting life or giving it a new license on life in the context of the world economy. I thus conclude this section by arguing that partial or full unemployment of the household labor in the international market will not necessarily and did not necessarily lead to the demise of the potential capabilities or abilities of the household or the agriculture to produce and reproduce itself. Exactly to the contrary, it enabled it, as it is evident from my field work in Egypt and North Sudan, as well as passing observation in Tunisia, Yemen, and North Iraq. It enabled this household to continue existing. However, there appears to be another problem even within the theory of articulation of modes of production or the push-pull model, and especially with the articulation of mode of production, is that they take the migrant worker as someone who is subject to the capitalist structures that are dominating, and do not look at it as a social actor who make choices, rational choices, at a given point in time to decide to migrate or not to migrate. And at the household level, in rural communities, this decision is not an individual decision. It's a household decision. Who migrates? When? Why? To where? All these are decisions that are part of the household strategy for survival in the face of the increasing capitalist penetration. And here, the household does not rely only on its own resources. It relies on neighbors, it relies on social networks, it relies on social capital to mobilize all the resources that are necessary for this group to migrate. As soon as we start looking at those peasants as social actors, a totally new perspective appears into our, in front of our eyes. I'm done? Yeah. Really? Time-wise?
No, I know.
Okay.
You conclude.
Okay, in a couple of minutes. Here there are two things. One of them is the fact that we find the household cooperating to send someone to migrate. And yet the household, it will be a big mistake to assume that the interests of the members of the household who are individuals are harmonious or are the same. Every one of them has his own strategies that might be in accord with this household strategy, as well as it might be in conflict with the household strategy. And it is probably important here to explain the rare moments in which the household come to cooperate together to send one migrant, rather than the conflicting interests of those individual persons. Why, for example, would the wife or the persons left behind carry the brunt of the contribution of the migrant person to the household? It has to be covered by somebody else. These are basic elements that are intended to try to explain why peasant migration take place in the current world system and under the current world system, and how this migration contributes to the survival of the subsistence economy of the household. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking so long.
Oh, thank you very much.